Hi, I'm George Torok, and welcome once again to Along the Rio Grande. Today we're in beautiful San Elizario, Texas, about 17 miles downriver from El Paso on the historic Mission Trail. San Elizario is a lively, charming community, and there's a lot to see here. San Elizario has also been designated as a historic district. In 1997, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. When you first arrive in San Elizario, the place to get started is the Portales building. It's right here on the plaza. It's the home of the San Elizario Genealogy and Historical Society. They have some exhibits that explain the history of the area, and they also have a walking tour that will help guide you around the district. This is Ben Sanchez. He's the director of Los Portales Museum. Ben, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and welcome to San Elizario.
Why is San Elizario such a historic place?
Well, I guess it's the beginnings of dating back to the late 1500s, and the architecture that San Elizario has resembles that of the early century.
So we have buildings here that kind of look the way that a lower valley community would look around the turn of the century.
Exactly, that's right.
And we've got a heritage going back more than 400 years.
As a matter of fact, with the arrival of Juan de Oñate here on the riverbanks of present-day San Elizario.
Now, Los Portales Museum is in the Portales building. What's the story of the building?
Los Portales Museum and Information Center was established last year so tourists can come and find out information of the various points of history that we have here.
And this is the home of the San Elizario Genealogy and Historical Society. How did that get started?
People came down here from all over the United States, met here, started reminiscing on stories and folklore, and so they decided that it would be good to establish a tradition every year and have conferences and whatnot, and so now this is the result of it.
So for the past 11 years or so, people have been gathering information about the community, tracing their genealogy, and a lot of that information has made its way to the museum.
Yes, it has made its way here, and it has expanded over the years with other families getting involved.
Can we go in and take a look?
Oh, we sure can.
Sure. This is the museum.
Well, this is exactly where you want to start. Most tourists, I would consider them coming down here to get information on the 17 locations that we have here.
What kinds of things do we have here?
We've got some maps of the United States, how they have changed during the course of time. In the front, we've got the Juan de Oñate statue. We also have family trees, we have pictures and other artifacts that is of interest to the tourists. I mean, they get fascinated, especially with the family trees, the roots. That's what we're trying to do, preserve the history of, and the culture of the families that established San Elizario. Hopefully we're going to be trying to get all this information into the website. We have the Veterans Room because of San Elizario being a military town, presidio forts and whatnot. And so all this has been a
big role in it over the years.
Yes, all this has been accumulated over the years. We have a small gift shop, prints, postcards, T-shirts, mugs. We also have books and censuses.
And of course, this is the place to get a copy of the walking tour.
And this is the place where you get most of all the copy of the walking tour. We have, for a small donation of $2, you can acquire. And that is a self-guided brochure that will take you to the 17 locations that we have here.
This is the entrance to the old presidio, and we've mentioned a few times here that San Elizario was a presidio town. Why did the Spanish need to build a fortress here?
Actually, there were two main reasons. The first one, when the Camino Real was established, it was they needed some protection for travelers that were traveling from south to north.
Okay.
And the second one was because of the Apache Indians. Needed some protection also against the families, the people here. And so that was the main reason that the presidio forts were established.
And then later they were settling or resettling some of the Apache into the fortress community.
Right. I think that was referred to as the rancherias, going back to establishing them inside the forts.
Now, this, as we mentioned, was the entrance. This was a walled presidio? There was a wall around the fortress?
Yes, there was a wall around the presidio. We have that inside the museum for those tourists that are coming in. They will be able to see that.
So there'll be a model of it, or
we
a
have
diagram.
a model. Yes, we're having that. That's part of the next project that is being done now as we speak.
Sure. Now, this building here has some significance. What's the story?
Yes, this building was owned by Edward Lafayette. He purchased it, I guess, around the 1850s. It has served as referred to as the Lafayette Barracks, where we had our regiment stay there during the Salt War.
And does it date from the time of the Presidio, or we're not sure?
We're not sure. I think this is just a newer building that came. This is where the original courthouse used to sit. And, but this was built, like I said, later on in the mid-1800s. And so, again, it has served many purposes also.
And we had troops here during the Salt War?
We had troops, yes. They were called in. It got that the violent episode that happened here during the Salt War was kind of heavy, so they got called in.
Brought in to maintain order and get things under control.
Exactly.
So this walled fortress was a pretty big structure.
Yes, as a matter of fact, it is believed that the whole Presidio fort encompassed what is now Socorro Road. Then behind the church we have Convent Road.
Okay.
Over here we've got Alarcon Road and now Main Street. And that would encompass the whole Presidio fort.
So the wall went around that entire area.
Exactly. That is believed to be the case. The entrance to the Presidio could have been right where we're standing.
So this would be the gates where people would enter and leave the fortress. Let's go take a look at the site of the old courthouse, and we can talk about some of the things on the plaza.
Let's do that. Okay.
Now, this is the site of the old courthouse?
Exactly, yes. Back in 1846, when we got our independence from Mexico, San Elizario was elected to be the first county seat. We were part of the territory of New Mexico, and therefore people here petitioned the Texas legislature that they wanted to form, first of all, be part of Texas, secondly, have our own county.
Okay. So
this is where El Paso County was born. This is the original site of the courthouse. The courthouse, I was able to see it back in the 1950s when it started deteriorating and just completely fell to the ground. Of course, there was no historic preservation efforts done then, and that's why we lost it.
Now, the building that we see here today, that's a newer structure. What's the story behind that?
Yes, this structure was built in 1971. A lady by the name of Janet Proxman felt that for some reason she wanted to build this building. It's a territorial structure. Had served as a dinner theater, Adobe Horseshoe dinner theater. The likes of Andy Griffith, Gloria de Heaven used to come down here and do live stage plays. Lasted about 8 years. Thereafter it became just a restaurant. Off and on it was closed. This is the second year that we've hosted our annual conference in this location. We've gone on the conferences for the last 10 years. However, this last year, 2 years, we've hosted it.
Now, the conference, we've mentioned that a couple of times. What exactly is the conference
that
takes place in April?
Well, the conference, depending on what we want to bring up to the public, this year we had the CEO from Missouri Historical Society. We felt that he was a motivator in the preservation, and we brought in Dr. Robert Archibald, gave an excellent presentation titled Place to Remember.
Talked about communities and building community and
not only San Elizario, but with the tourist industry taking off, we felt that El Paso would benefit from having a person of such stature coming here and deliver us a presentation.
Now, it's not just a presentation, there's also some other things that go on.
We have other activities. We're going on 11 years now of hosting the first Thanksgiving, April 30th. Sure. As it's been identified here, happening back in 1598. Near the river banks of present-day San Elizario. And
so we have a reenactment?
We have reenactments. We have La Toma, which is a presentation of declaring this land in honor of the King of Spain. and before they traveled on upward towards New Mexico.
And we have a whole festival that
So we have a
develops as
festival,
well, right?
yes, one of so many festivals that we have here.
Now, we've used the building for the conference the last couple of years, and I understand that there's some discussion about making a bit more use of the building.
Our commissioner has been instrumental in trying to attain this building. It's up for sale, and if the price is right and everything goes well, we've got our fingers crossed. Hopefully we can take possession of it, also lease it, and use it as a cultural arts center for performing arts for the students here.
Yes. And maybe have some other types of conferences and other types of meetings take place there as well.
Exactly.
Now, no trip to San Elizario is complete without a visit to the Presidio Chapel. Can we go over there and take a look?
Oh, most definitely.
Sure. Now, we're here at the Presidio Chapel, but of course this is not the original Presidio Chapel. There was one built shortly after the construction of the fort, I would imagine.
Right. The first one that was built, when it came, they decided to bring the Presidio over from nearby Fort Hancock, where this was San Elizario was out there. They moved it out here 1783, on or abouts there.
Okay.
Built it. And so later on, floods came. There was no Elephant Butte. Washed it down.
Sure.
Washed down Socorro, washed down San Elizario. And so that's why you see it now built on higher ground. This was completed in 1887.
This looks a bit different than the churches that we see at Isleta and Socorro. Those are mission churches, right?
Yes, those are missions, and you can identify that by the way they are built. First of all, I believe they were built by Socorro was built by Pito Indians, Isleta by the Tiwas, in a cross-shaped, long, narrow buildings. Missions, as the term or the word explains, was used to Christianize the indigents.
Sure.
Okay, a chapel was used specifically for the families and the soldiers that lived within the compound of the Presidio fort.
So the shape is a bit
The shape is different. It's square type, box type deal. Also bringing in the European architectural style to it. Arches, we have 3 arches inside, and then the arches on both sides of the church.
And what do we see inside? What's in the interior?
Past the foyer, as you look back, you will find some names written on the back wall. Those are soldiers that left off for World War II, or boys from here, that their families wonder, well, what can we do to keep them up in prayer?
Sure.
The priest said, well, why don't we write their names on the walls? And that is a symbolism of how patriotic this community is.
And the interior design of the church, what things do we see there?
The interior, you will see back in 1960, they went and hand painted some angels that are sitting right on the wall. The vigas that existed are covered by, again, European-styled ceiling.
Sure.
Again, we have about 4 sections of benches that were, in those times, were designated to certain families.
Well, Ben, we want to thank you for taking us around and showing us some of the interesting sites here in San Elizario. Skip Clark, who does some archaeological work with the Texas Historical Commission, he's waiting over at the jail for us, and he's going to tell us all about some of the things that have been going on there. I know you got to get back into the museum and take care of business there. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Well, thank you for coming down here.
We enjoyed it.
It was a privilege and honor.
Thanks.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
Well, how you doing?
Good, good to see you. You've done a lot of work with the Texas Historical Commission, been involved in some of the archaeological surveys that have been done in this area, and I understand you've done some work on the jail as well.
Yes, I spent a big chunk of my adult life down here with the Mission Trail Association.
Now, we've been talking about San Elizario as a Spanish colonial town, the Presidio and the Presidio Chapel that was built. Mexico becomes an independent country in the early years of the 1800s. And then the United States and Mexico fight a war, and this part of Mexico becomes part of the United States, part of Texas. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, 1848. What kind of changes take place
Oh gosh.
after that war with Mexico?
If you can imagine going to sleep one night and you're a citizen of Mexico and waking up the next morning and being told you're now a citizen of the United States. They used the deepest channel of the Rio Grande as the official border. By doing so, it put Isleta, Socorro, and San Elizario in the United States. Culturally, politically, economically, it was a major, major change for the folks in San Eli. They had been accustomed to Spanish colonial rule, Mexican federal rule, and then all of a sudden, what's the United States? Who are these people?
And we have American settlers coming in fairly soon.
It wasn't very long after 1848 that a lower road was created to California that came through San Elizario. And a significant number of people came through this community on their way to the gold fields.
California Gold Rush.
An equal number ultimately came through as part of the Civil War.
Sure.
And they came back and they stayed.
So we have a fairly large Anglo population moving in.
Relatively
1850s,
speaking,
1860s.
large is relative.
What is San Elizario like in the 1850s, 1860s?
San Elizario is the largest population center of the American communities.
Okay.
Keep in mind that you already had Paso del Norte, which was settled in
Ciudad Juarez
Ciudad
today.
Juarez as a major settlement, but after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it remained in Mexico.
Sure.
So on the American side, you've got the communities of Franklin, Concordia, Socorro, Isleta, and San Elizario. And San Elizario is the population center.
This is where the most
This
people
is
are.
where the people live, a population well over 1,000. It supported 2 grist mills, at least 3 mercantile stores, a couple of stage stops. It was the, as I said, the political, the cultural, the economic center of the El Paso Valley. And it stayed that way pretty much until the formulation of El Paso County became official. And for several years, because of its size and importance, it was named the county seat. But this is where people were traveling to. The big economic feature was agriculture.
Sure.
Truck gardens, hay for the military, grapes for winemaking. This was what made this part of the valley so profitable. When folks come to San Eli today, they come to see the church, the Los Portales. What they're looking at is part of the original Presidio grounds. The Presidio was a very imposing structure with a set of double walls that enclosed virtually what we now call Old San Elizario.
How does the jail come into the picture?
A little later than the Presidio, but let's take a walk over there and we'll tell you the story.
Sure.
We're standing in front of the San Elizario jail. In all likelihood, at least the second San Elizario jail.
Okay.
The building we're in front of today dates after the Presidio.
Okay.
Based on a couple of artifacts that we recovered from the interior, a shard of glass that dated to about 1860, and a little piece of ceramic that couldn't have been built any earlier than 1860. The other thing that came out during some of my research was that being made out of adobe, I would find things eroding out of the adobe. One of which was ceramic shards called Mission Valley Brown, Valle Bajo Brown, a very common brownware. What this suggested to me was that the bricks used for this building were likely salvaged from the Presidio walls,
Sure.
which crumbled and were basically reused throughout the community. Now, this particular window is a real good example of what happened in the evolution of this building. This window header dressed lumber after the turn of the century. This window header undressed, locally grown, locally produced. Now, you notice there's a significant difference between these two headers.
Sure.
Well, what this revealed was that the building had been modified with an original roof level probably 18 to 20 inches lower than it is now. At some point, the roof was quite literally raised. And when the roof was raised, the existing windows, the existing door frame had to be modified. The original building was a single room. At some point, a second room was added, which now houses the 2 jail cells.
Now, I understand the cells are interesting. There's a story behind those.
They're very unique. The jail cells you see here today started life as wrought iron jail cells. The bars were riveted together. Over the years, they were modified. Little bits and pieces changed. But there was enough of the original texture left to suggest that a company out of Chicago called the Poly Jail Company may have constructed these. They bear a very strong resemblance to jail cells that the Poly Company built for El Paso, which were subsequently moved somewhere. If indeed they are the ones that came from El Paso, then we are fortunate to have a surviving example of turn-of-the-century jail construction.
And this is something very rare.
It is very rare. When I spoke to the folks from the Poly Jail Company, they could not believe that the jail cells they showed on their invoice could still exist.
Now, I understand that Billy the Kid was in San Elizario at some point.
A real good friend of Billy's by the name of Segura got himself in trouble and thrown in jail here in San Eli. Billy the Kid was at a little rancho up above Vado area, and word was sent to him that his buddy was in trouble and needed his help. Billy, being the good friend he was, mounted his horse in the dark of night and headed for San Elizario, hell-bent to bust his buddy out of jail. The story says that Billy crossed the river a couple of times and stopped long enough in El Paso to feed his horse some crackers at a bar. Ultimately, he made his appearance in San Eli about 2 o'clock in the morning, and being perfectly bilingual, walks up to the door, starts beating on it, and in perfect Spanish says, "Texas Rangers, I got prisoners." To which, of course, the dutiful guards opened up.
Open the doors.
And in the course of opening up, they were faced with a 6-shooter. And doing what any reasonable person would do when faced with a 6-shooter, they said, "How can I help you?" To which Billy said, "Get my buddy out of jail." They got Segura out. The jail keys were deposited on the top of the building, and Billy and Segura went south, never to be seen in San Eli again. Billy the Kid historians felt that the story was nothing but a story, and it was from the creative mind of a gentleman by the name of Ash Upson, who was supposedly the ghostwriter for the book. However, folks in the valley believe very strongly that it did happen. And there has been some degree of controversy. My dear friend and mentor, Leon Metz, was making a speech in San Eli on the steps of the church one day and made the statement to the effect that it could never have happened. It was a long time before Leon was asked back. He has been back since. But in trying to determine the validity of the story, one needs to remember that most folklore is rooted in some truth.
Sure.
So what I did was to ask the folks I knew in San Eli, 8 or 10 of them who'd either grown up here, whose families traced their lineage to San Eli, about the story. All of them had heard it. But what really got my attention was 3 of them had heard the story in Spanish from a monolingual, older adult relative who was likely born between 1880 and 1890.
Unlikely that they read the book.
Very, very unlikely. Billy the Kid story is just one of many, many stories about the buildings in San Eli, about the people in San Eli that pretty much makes San Eli what it is.
Now, we've been talking about the Salt War, made a few references there. What exactly was the Salt War?
For generations, the Spanish colonial settlers, the Mexican settlers, harvested salt from the base of the Guadalupe Mountains. This was communal property. It was open to anybody who wished to mine the salt. Well, when the Americanization of the area began, one aspect of that was the concept of property ownership for development, for profit, from, in this case, mining. One faction wanted to gain title to the salt flats and sell the salt. The other faction, which was made up of the residents of San Eli and various other communities in the surrounding area, were used to the communal aspect of this property where anybody could harvest it. Sure. To make a very long and complicated story short, what happened was the faction that wanted the salt as a profit-making endeavor and the folks that wanted to keep it communal met head-on. People were killed. Law and order simply disappeared, quite literally. Some of them ran away. As an end result, it created a cloud over San Elizario that would hang for many, many years.
And what happens to San Elizario in the late 1800s into the early years of the 20th century?
The face of the community changes dramatically. With the advent of the railroad and the fact that it bypassed the community, new towns along the railroad were created, one of which was Clint, not even 3 or 4 miles north of here. With the creation of these little siding towns, people no longer had to come to San Eli. With the advent of the railroad, communities like Franklin, which became El Paso, grew quite literally overnight.
Sure. To
become the political and the economic centers of the El Paso Valley. So once the railroad came in, it also introduced new types of agriculture. By the early 1900s, cotton was being introduced to the valley. Cotton became the cash crop. Cotton was shipped from railroad heads. Again, San Eli takes a back seat in that sense to the rest of the El Paso Valley. But it still maintained a certain air about itself through its population, through its native inhabitants, through its architecture.
So this is why San Elizario is so well preserved today.
Basically, this is one of the contributing factors. The other factor is the people. When I was doing the work on the jail here in the 80s, I'd work on weekends. And I'd be out here sifting stuff, and people would stop and say, "What are you doing to my jail? You're going to tear it down? You can't do that." This was all before I could say, "No, we're with the Mission Jail Association, we're trying to do it." After they heard what was going on, they thought it was great. But this happened every weekend, every time I was down here. People wanted to know what was going to happen to their jail. And it's this view of their community that has pretty much kept things, at least in the shape they are now. They want to know what's happening to their community. And by gosh, you better not do anything bad to it.
Sure. Skip, thanks so much
My
for
pleasure.
telling us a little bit about the jail
It's
today.
always a joy to talk with you.
Terrific. Well, as you can see, there's certainly a lot to experience here in San Elizario. I hope you all get a chance to come down and visit this exciting, historic community. Pick up a copy of the walking tour or come to one of the festivals that takes place in April or September. I want to thank Ben Sanchez from the San Elizario Genealogy and Historical Society for showing us around today, and Skip Clark as well for explaining some of the interesting sites. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today on Along the Rio Grande, and I hope to see you on our next program.